Gemara has to do with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Amar Rabba Babachon Amar Rabbi Yochanan. What Rabba Babachon said in the name of Yochanan. Why does it say in a pasuk? Yirash Hashem Taisif Yomim. Those who have fear of God have increased days. Ushnois Rishayim, the years of evil people, Tiktzarna, are going to be shortened. So we darshan like this: Yiras Hashem Taisif Yomim. Yiras Hashem brings long life, adds days. Zeh Migdash Rishon. That's referring to the first Beis Hamikdash. What does the first Beis Hamikdash have to do with long lives? The first Beis Hamikdash stood for 410 years. And
that's the connection to this week's Parsha, Baruch. Bezos.
Why?
Bezos Yavo Aharon.
Bezos, right. Rashi brings down. That's the first Rashi, right. Excellent. So, Shimshu boy Ella Yudches Kahanim Gedolim. There were 18 Kahanim Gedolim in 420 years. Or according to the Gears of the Gra, there's 12, or Tosfos 9. But there was a limited amount of Kahanim Gedolim. Either they got elected as Kayin Gadol, and they stayed for many years. The years of Rishayim are shortened. Zeh Migdash Sheni. That refers to the base of Migdash Sheni. Sha'amad, that stood Shdalad Meis V'Esen Shana. That stood for 420 years. According to Al Gemara, it stood for 420 years. Scholars say it stood for much longer than that because there's something to do with the years that doesn't make sense. But the Gemara says that the second Beis Hamikdash stood for 420. And they had 300 Kahanim Gedolims during those 420 years. And think about it. Same hand, you have to deduct Mem Shana. There was a 40-year period that there was one Kohen Gadol. Shimon Hatzadik. Shimon Hatzadik was the Kohen Gadol for 40 years. So you have 420 minus 40 years, and you have 380 years left. And they have 80 years that Yochanan Kohen Gadol was the Kohen Gadol. So he took up another 80 years. So then you have 300 years left. And another 10 years that this Yishmael ben Pavi was a big tzaddik, he also served as Kohen Gadol. So what you have remaining either 290 years or 289 years. What the Gemara says over here, that in a span of 290 years, you all have 300 Kahanim Gedolim taking the job. So every year they had to rechange the job. So, and that's because they were Rishoyim, and they either bought it and they were taken down, or they died. And therefore, we see that's the taich of this pasuk, Yiras Hashem. When you have fear of God, people stay in their jobs for many days, and for Rishoyim, it's very short-lived. Dr. Gemara. We have this girsa on the side that says this is another memra. This is connects with what I just said. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Tursa v'kol kach lama lefi sha'yloichan oisim bedomim. They used to buy the Kahuna Gedola with money, and that's why they were Rishoyim. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Tursa. Okay, we're 5 lines from the bottom of Tesomid Aleph. Why was Shiloh destroyed? Shiloh was the place where they had the permanent Mishkan from the Midbar. It arrived in Noiv and then Gilgal, and then the Mishkan ended up for many years in Shiloh. I'm sure you visited it in Eretz Yisrael. It's a tourist site. What they think where the Mishkan stood, and actually the shul there looks like the Mishkan. It's built like the Mishkan. Nice place to visit near the winery. So that Mishkan stood for about 359 years. So the question is, why did God destroy it? What did the Jews do wrong? There were 2 problems there. One, Gilei Arayis, immorality, Ubizyan Kedoshim, and degrading of the kachim, degrading of karbonas. So the Gemara says, Gilei Arayis, where do you see that there was immorality there? The pasuk says, the pasuk describes Eli, who was the Kohen Gadol at that time. He had 2 kids, Chafni and Pinchas. And the pasuk says, the Eli Zokei Ma'oi. Eli was very old. V'shama kol ashiyasa banav l'chol Yisrael. And he heard what his kids were doing to the Jewish people. In other words, he heard the rumors about his kids, Be'ez kol asher yishkavun es hanoshim hatzoyves pesach oil moed. That his kids would be sleeping with women, married women, that were gathering at the opening of the Mishkan. And his kids were doing immorality. Now, from the pasuk, it seems that there would be that Eli, who is the big Kohen Gadol Tzaddik, had his kids being mezana, but it's not true. The pasuk is more severe than what really happened. Anybody who will say B'nei Elu Chati, that the sons of Eli did big averis, Eine Ela Toy. He's making a mistake. You're not reading Tanakh correctly. So what was the problem? Mitoich, since we go to Tes Amud Sheni, Sheshihu Eski Nehem, they cause ladies when they give birth after the end of a certain period of time, either 40 days for a male or 80 days for a female, at the end of the time, they would have to bring karbonas. Now, min ha-Torah, and everything is min ha-Torah. The women, after they give birth, after 7 days, they could sleep with their husbands. They could get back together again. But in order for them to eat kachim, they would have to bring karbonas, pigeons, to the Beis Amigdash as a sacrifice. Now, these women at the time of Eli were even machmir, were more strict, and they did not be with their husbands until after they brought the carbons. So in other words, some of them waited 80 days, some of them waited 40 days, but they didn't stay with their husbands, even though they could have, until they brought the carbonas. Now, they would come with their pigeons to the Beis Hamikdash, to the Mishkan Shiloi, and the children of Eli, Rashi says, Vehem hoya bale geus. They were arrogant people, difficult people, and they would be not so diligent to bring you the carbonas right away. They played around with time, and therefore the women that were waiting for their carbon to be makrav, they slept there overnight and waited for the next day, and therefore they slept there overnight.
Leaving.
So therefore after they slept there, they could not be with their husband. They had to wait an extra day. And therefore, they would mevatel the women from doing Periya Verivya. Now, this is interesting because technically, the women could have deposited money into a kupa, into like a big box in the Mishkan, and they could assume that the Kahanim would bring the carbon. You didn't have to check. The women didn't have to be there to see their pigeons being nekraf, but the women knew that the children of Eli were not careful, and therefore they wanted to see them bringing the carbon before they go be with their husband. But since they delayed the women from being with their husband, Mala Aleina Kosev, the Torah, the Nach, compares it Kila Shachvam, as if they slept with these women. Now, Bizyain Kachim, where do we see that the children of Eli degraded Kachim? Because the pasuk says, "Gam beterem yaktirin es achelev." When an individual during the time of the Mishkan Shiloh brought a carbon, part of the carbon, as you know, has to be given to the kohen. Now, the kohen can only take his part only after they bring the insides, the fats that's supposed to be brought in the mizbeach. Then you give the kohen his portion. But these kahanim would say, "Gam beterem yaktirin es achelev," before they offered up the fats on the mizbeach. Uvor nara kohen, one of the young kahanim would come from the family of Eli, v'omar, and he would tell Lisha Zaveach, to the person that made the shechting, to know basa, give me the meat, to give to the roast of the kohen. He doesn't want to take it that you're going to cook it. He wants to take the meat raw. Ki im chai. For the person that brought the carbon would say, first offer up the fats of the carbon to the mizbeach, and then and then you take whatever you desire. Don't take before I see that my part goes on to the mizbeach. And the kohen would say, I want to take it right now. If you're not going to give it to me right now, I'm going to take it I will overpower you and take it by force. And the pasuk says, "Vati chatas hanaorim gedola me'od." The sins of the young lads of the Kahanim were tremendous, as Pnei Hashem in front of God. Kini atzu anoshim es minchas Hashem. They degraded or blasphemed the people, the presence, the gift of Hashem. So the pasuk describes the degradation of kachim that the children of Eli were doing. So I just want to point out to you, which is very, very important. That is, just because the sons of Eli were doing immoral things and degrading kachim, does that mean everybody was doing it? So the answer is yes. If the leaders are doing something that's wrong, and that must mean that the people are doing something worse. And therefore, as we just learned in the Gemara, they were doing light things. Maybe the people, the Chafni and Pinchas, the children of Eli, were derelict in bringing the karbonos right away. Could be they were davening, could be they were inadvertently pushing the women off a little bit. But certainly it was a light considered Avera, and the Nach considers it as if they were sleeping with the married woman, as if they were doing immoral things with the married woman. And the degradation of kachim had to do with their enthusiasm to eat kachim right away. So, except the Torah describes it, the Nach describes it as something very bad, as a big, big Avera. So if the leaders are doing this light Avera, then the people are doing something much worse. Next, so now we understood why Mishkan Shiloh was destroyed. I don't know if you've ever visited it, but in Mishkan Shiloh, and we could go visit it. They can show you the place where Chana davened, or they make a whole tourist attraction, and with a big film. It's the next time you're there, it's worth to go there. Migdash Rishon b'Mei Chorev. Why was the first base of Migdash destroyed? So the Gemara says, but nay, because Gimel Devarim, the Jews were sitting with three things over there. Shahaya by Avodah Zarah. The people were doing idolatry, Begilia Arayas, and immorality, Ushvichas Damim, and killing. That's why the first base of Migdash was destroyed, because rampant among the Jewish people at that time was the following three things. Avodah Zarah. Now, we can understand Avodah Zarah. Why would they serve idols? But we could understand that just like you see, that there's a huge drug problem, so an addiction problem. So at that time, Avodah Zarah was considered like the drug, the addiction problem of its time. And that was rampant during the time of the first base of Migdash. How do you know that? It says in the pasuk, Ki kotzar hamatza mihistoreya. The bed was too short from being stretched out. What does that mean? My kotzar hamatza mihistoreya. What does it mean that the bed was too short to be stretched out? This is like a mushal. Rabbi Yodason, kotzar matzazeh mihistoreya olav shnei reim ke'echad. It was impossible for this bed to be stretched out to hold two people, two friends at one time. In other words, you can't be serving God and serving the Avodah Zarah at the same time. So the Jews at that time had to make a choice. They will serve Avodah Zarah or serve God, but you can't have both. So, and then the pasuk says, at that time, the pasuk says, "V'hamasecha sora kihiskanes." The masecha, the covering, was too narrow. Kihiskanes. So we darshan this pasuk homiletically. Masecha refers to Avodah Zarah. Tzara was a rival. Kihiskanes against God, who's called Hiskanes. Amar Rab Shmuel Bar Nachmedu. Rab Shmuel Nachmedu explained this pasuk homiletically. Kimota, he would say over, Kimota Rabbi Yonasan l'haikra bachi. When Rabbi Yonasan would come to this pasuk, he would cry. Amar, he would say, how could it be? Man diksiv, the pasuk says about Hashem, which you say in the Shira every day, Koinis kaneid mehayam. God made the water of the sea during Kriyas Yamsus gather. Koinis means gather. Kaneid, like a wall. God made this amazing miracle of the Kriyas Yamsuf. So he's his kanes. Nasa loy masecha tzara. To him, an Avodah Zarah became like a rival. Like when you call a man married to two women, each one is called a tzara to each other, a rival to each other. So to God, the pasuk is lamenting that God, who did this great miracle to Jewish people, had an Avodah Zarah as his rival. So basically, when the Nach describes what was rampant during the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, Avodah Zarah we see clearly was rampant at that time. How do you know Gilei Arayis? How do you know there was immorality at that time? The Ksiv, because it says in a pasuk, Vayomer Hashem, also a pasuk in Yeshaya, Yan ki gavu b'nois Tzion, v'telachtu netuyas skarim. The daughters of Zion, which is the daughters of Israel, started walking netuyas skarim, a haughty walk, u'masakroi sainayim, and they would darken their eyes with makeup. Holach v'tonaif v'tofaif tilachno u'veragleim tikaasna. They would be walking and mincing as they go, making a noise with their feet. So we darshan like this: Ya'an ki gavu b'nois Tzion. This is how the women walked at that time, as if they were walking in a fashion show. Every woman walked on the street like she was a model. Shahaya mahalchas. First, the Gemara says they went high. What does that mean? The women walked high. Shahaya mahalchas arucha betzad ketzara. The women would walk together with a tall woman walking next to a short woman, in order to bring out the height of the tall woman, so she should be attractive. They would have her walk in the streets next to a short woman, and again to get people to gaze at her. The women walked at that time with their necks outstretched. The necks was their backs were straightened up. They would have a lot of mascara, makeup on their eyes. They would walk in little steps. What does that mean? They would walk the back of the heel to the toe of the foot behind. In other words, they walked one step after another step very slowly in order to get people to look at them. And not only that, that was the way their gait was. But how was there? They also had a smell to them. Uveragleim ta'akasno. What does that mean? With their feet, they made a noise. What kind of noise? Rabbi Yitzchak shoymevius more bar parsimon. They bought myrrh oil, or parsimon is another type of perfume. Umanichas benaleim, and they would put it in their shoes. Ushabagias eitzel b'churei Yisrael, and when they would reach the young people of the Jewish people, bayatais, they would crush, make a bang with their feet, umatizin aleim, and spray the smell onto the young boys, the young people. Umachnisim behen yetzahara, and a yetzahara came into the young people, the young men, ke'eres bichos, like the snake when he's angry, like a poison when a snake bites and gives off a poison when it's angry. It was such a yetzahara that it was definitely hard for the young people to shake off. Now, who was doing this? It's not unmarried women. Married women were doing this. So that's what was going on during the time of the first Beis Hamikdash. That's how the pasuk in Yeshaya describes the women at that time. Shvichas damim. Where do you see that there was murder at that time? The ksiv, the gam naki shafach menashe harbe miyoid ad asha milei shushlaim per lepeh. There was a lot of innocent blood spilled during the King Menashe's time, until Yerushalayim was filled with blood from one end to the other end. So that was the first Beis Hamikdash. So the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of the three cardinal sins. Now the Gemara says, Aval Migdash Sheni, but the second Beis Hamikdash, Shoya Oiskim B'Torah, they were learning a lot of Torah. Uva mitzvahs gebilas chasadim. They had mitzvahs gebilas chasadim. Mipnei ma'achorev. Why was it destroyed? So the Gemara says, Mipnei shehoyse boy sinas chinam, because they had baseless hatred. Now, what is baseless hatred? What is sinas chinam? It's not really defined. Sina means when you wish something bad to happen to a person. Chinam is you have no reason to do, except why would a person, if you ask anybody, do you hate somebody? No, nobody hates anybody. And yet, the problem of sinas chinam still exists till today, because if it didn't exist, then the Beis Hamikdash would have been built. So what does it mean, sinas chinam? So sinas chinam means you wish somebody bad because no reason except that he's ahead of you. And when somebody you think is ahead of you in life, is doing better than you, so you wish something bad happens to them, so that you can at least feel that you're not. He in other words, that person is diminishing you, and you feel that him being ahead of you is somehow diminishing your self-esteem, your self-worth. And therefore, this teaches you that was the sinner that existed during the second Beis Hamikdash and still exists till today. L'lamedcha, to teach you, sheshkula sinas chinam kigeneged shalosh averos. Sinas chinam is like the three averos, because both Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. The first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of avodah zarah, gila raya, shvichas damim, and the second Beis Hamikdash just had sinas chinam. What's the comparison? Because if you think about it, avodah zarah, if we view avodah zarah as like an addiction, and gilui arayos and shvichas damim, all because a person doesn't feel a good self-worth or self-esteem. He doesn't value his infinite self. Sinas chinam is the same thing, because you value yourself based on where you stand with somebody else. And if that person has something different than you or better, then you wish sinah for no reason, as long as he should come down to your level. But that's because you don't realize your self-worth, your self-esteem, your infinite soul. These averos are very similar what existed in the first Beis Hamikdash, which was expressed outwardly in the first Beis Hamikdash, and was expressed inwardly in the second Beis Hamikdash. So now the Gemara continues and says another point. Rishoyim hoya, in the first Beis Hamikdash, they were evil people. They would still rely on Hashem. So to speak, they fooled themselves. Sometimes a person could fool himself in thinking that I have the Beis Hamikdash, nothing bad can happen to me. Or a person could do Averis and say, you know what, I'm a big Baal Tzedakah, God needs me. God doesn't need you. Asin L'Mikdash Rishon, we're referring to the first Beis Hamikdash, where the Nach describes that the people at that time were fooling themselves. The Ksiv, Roshel b'Shoichet Yishpaitu. Their leaders with Shoichet, with bribery, would take judgments. The Kahanim b'Mechir Yoru, only with a price would they teach. The prophets, with money, it depends. If you gave them money, they said a good prophecy to you. Everything was bought with money at that time. And nevertheless, people were doing various left and right during the first Beis Hamikdash. And they still relied on God. Hashem is with us. Nothing bad can happen to us. So that's very interesting that the first Beis Hamikdash, they didn't even see it coming. That's what I'm trying to say. The first Beis Hamikdash, they didn't even see that they're going to lose, because look, the Beis Hamikdash is here. God needs us, apparently. Therefore, God brought three terrible things to those people at that time because of the three averos of avodah zarah, gilui arayos, and shvichas damim. Shenemar, lochem beglalchem tzion. Tzion, which is Israel, sada techaresh, it will be like a field that's plowed over. Yishlayim and tia, and Yerushalayim will be like a garbage heap. Harabayis lebamis yar will be like a forest, a shrine forest that nobody comes to. So those three things, techaresh, and lebamis yar, those three things happen to correspond to the three averos they were doing. So now the Gemara asks a side point. Ubamigdash rishon lo yahava b'sinas chinam. In the first Beis Hamikdash, there was no baseless hatred. V'ksiv, it says in the pasuk, Megurei el cherev hayu es ami l'chein soifik svoik el yorech. This is a pasuk in Yecheskel describes some people, some people during the first Beis Hamikdash time period. What would they used to do? So the Omar Rabbi Elazar explained during the first Beis Hamikdash, you had people. They were friends. They gathered together. That's what Maguri means. They would gather together, eat and drink and have a party. And yet, with the swords that were in their tongue, they would stab each other. They would insult each other. You know, when they ate and drank, they got on each other's nerves, and they brought around sinah. They displayed sinah for one another. So that we see that even in the first Beis Hamikdash, they had sinas chinam. So the Gemara says, "Hahi b'nesi Yisrael haber." That's talking about the presidents of the Jewish people, because the Ksiv, Zak, the Halel, cry and wail, Ben Adam, you son of man, ki hoisa ba'ami. This was in my nation. The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Zak the Halel Ben Adam yochel koil. Maybe everybody had this problem of sinas chinam. Only the leaders of the Jewish people had Siddur Chinam in the Migdash Rishon, but not everybody. In the second base of Migdash, everybody was guilty of Siddur Chinam. People were more honest back then. So, and this first base of Migdash, if you disliked somebody, you let them know, but you weren't echad b'peh ve'echad b'leiv, speaking with your mouth one way, and with your heart you mean something else. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar, the Amri Tarbayim. He said a very interesting thing. During the first base of Migdash, earlier generations, Nizgalu Avodim, it was obviously, you could see what their Avera was, right? It was Avodah Zarah, Gilei Arayah, Shvichas Damim. Nizgalu, it was revealed, Kitzab, when this will all end. And it ended after 70 years. They knew that it was going to end, that they're going to get forgiveness after 70 years, then they could build the second base of Migdash. Achrayim, but the later generations, our generation, and the generation from the second base of Migdash and onward, they didn't. Nobody feels that they're doing anything wrong. It's always something, a thought that you have inside. It's a feeling that you have inside yourself. So we never know when this galus is going to end. So, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan, it's better the nail of people who lived in earlier generation from the stomach of people who lived in later generation. Obviously, the stomach is more important than a fingernail, and yet the fingernails of the people who lived in the earlier generations are better than the stomach of the people that lived in the later generation. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Earlier people are better than us. Amalei Rav Shlokes said, Adarabba. I would think just the opposite. Acharonim adifi. The later generations are better than the earlier generations. Why? We suffer under the yoke of foreign kings. In other words, the Jews have no independence, and it's very expensive to be a Jew. And you see, people are learning Torah. So we are learning more Torah than the previous generation. So we must be better than the previous generation. And that was Rish Lakish's opinion. That holds true today. I mean, there's more Torah learning by our generation than in previous generations. Simply, so Rish Lakish says that the second generations are better. Amalei, so Rabbi Yochanan argued. He said, "Bira techiyach." Just look at the base of Midrash. Shechazim Rishonim, the people who lived during the time the first base of Midrash, they got a new base of Midrash. V'loy chazul achronim, and it never returned for the people, for us. So we must be on a lesser of a madrega than people who lived during the time of the first base of Midrash. One more. Sha'alu es Rabbi Eliezer. They asked Rabbi Eliezer, Rishonim Gedolah, are the earlier generation bigger than us? Or Achronim Gedolim? Or are the later generations better? Who is better? The earlier generations or the later generations? Amalehem, he would say, Tnu Einechem Babira. Look at the way the base of Migdash was destroyed. The first base of Migdash, they destroyed the base of Migdash, but it wasn't a total ransack that you find by the second base of Migdash. The second base of Migdash, you look now behind the kaisel, there's nothing there. Ikedi Amri, he said, Omalem Eidechem Babira. The proof is the base of Migdash. The people that lived in the first base of Migdash merited to see the building of the second base of Migdash, those that lived long enough. So they saw that after 7 years, we got it back. But our generation, from the second base of Migdash and onwards, obviously we're not as great as those people, because we see the proof is that we still don't have a base Migdash. Okay, I think we should stop over here, because the next Gemara begins with a story of Rish Lakish, and we could take this up tomorrow. Very interesting Gemara that we're learning for the next few days. Yeah, you see, interesting how the Gemara describes Sinas Chinam as same idea as Avodah Zarah, Gilei Arayah, Shvichas Damim. I find that fascinating.
Yep.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.